The sun scalded the earth, turning the horizon to a wavering shimmer. Dust coated her tongue, gritty as despair, and clung to the frayed hem of her dress. Her boots, cracked and worn, sank into the parched ground with each step, the weight of her body a burden she could scarcely carry. The town of Bitter Creek lay behind her, its laughter still ringing in her ears, sharp mocking, like the crack of a whip. They'd sold her for a pittance, a handful of coins tossed into the dirt, her worth measured in the jeers of men who saw only a broken thing. Her name was Clara, though no one had spoken it in days. The canteen at her hip slapped against her thigh, empty now, its leather cracked like her lips. She stumbled, knees grazing the earth, and the sky spun above her, vast and indifferent. Buzzards wheeled in lazy arcs, their shadows crossing her path like a warning. She'd been a seamstress once, her fingers nimble with thread, her laughter soft as the cotton she worked. That was before the fever took her family, before the debt collectors came, before the auction block in Bitter Creek's square. The memory of it burned, the auctioneer's gavel, the crowd's snickers. The man who'd bought her a rancher, silent and weathered, his eyes unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. He'd paid the price, taken her hand, and led her away without a word, not to claim her but to set her free. Or so he'd said. Now, she walked alone. The rancher's promise of a home somewhere beyond the ridge feeling as distant as the stars. Her knees buckled again, and she caught herself on a jagged rock, the sting of it sharp against her palm. Blood welled a thin, red line, and she stared at it, transfixed. It was the first color she'd seen in days that wasn't dust or sky. The wind carried a faint sound, hooves, steady and deliberate. Growing closer, she didn't lift her head. Hope was a dangerous thing, and she'd learned to distrust it. But the sound grew louder, and with it came the creak of leather, the snort of a horse. She forced her eyes up, squinting against the glare. A figure emerged from the haze, tall in the saddle, his shadow stretching long across the cracked earth. He stopped a few paces away, the horse's breath steaming in the heat. It was the rancher, the one who'd paid for her. His face was lined, sun-worn, his eyes the color of slate. He carried no whip, no rope, just a canteen slung across his chest. "You're a ways from where I left you," he said, voice low, like gravel underfoot. She didn't answer, her throat too dry for words. He dismounted, boots stirring dust, and knelt beside her, holding out the canteen. The water was warm, tasting of metal and mercy, and she drank until her chest ached. He watched her, not with pity, but with something she couldn't name, something that made her want to look away. "Name's Elias," he said, taking the canteen back. "You can't keep walking like this. Ain't nothin' out here but death." She wiped her mouth, the back of her hand smearing dirt and blood. "I don't belong to you," she rasped, the words sharper than she meant. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he stood, offering his hand. It was calloused, steady, the kind of hand that had wrestled calves and mended fences. She stared at it, then at the horizon where the sun bled red into the earth. The buzzards were still there waiting. She took his hand, not because she trusted him, but because she was tired of falling. He led her to the horse, helping her into the saddle. The leather creaked beneath her and the world tilted as they moved, the rhythm of the horse's steps lulling her into a haze. She didn't know where they were going, only that the land stretched endless before them, a canvas of dust and stone. Her fingers tightened on the saddle horn, and for a moment, she saw her mother's face, pale, fever-worn, whispering her name in a room that smelled of sickness. The memory stung, and she pushed it down, focusing on the heat of the horse beneath her, the faint creak of Ilias's boots in the stirrups. The world felt too big, too empty, and yet his presence anchored her. A weight she didn't yet understand. Asterisk, asterisk, the horse's hooves churned the earth, kicking up clouds of dust that stung Clara's eyes. The air was thick with the scent of sagebrush and sweat, the horizon a bruised purple as the sun sank lower. Her hands gripped the saddle horn, knuckles pale, her body swaying with the animal's rhythm. Elias rode behind her, his silence heavier than the heat. She felt his gaze, not on her, but on the land ahead, as if he could see something she couldn't, a promise, or maybe just a place to rest. The world seemed to hold its breath. The only sounds the creak of leather and the distant cry of a hawk. Her mind drifted unmoored by hunger and fatigue. She saw her father's hands, rough from years of the plow, folding her small fingers around a needle and thread. "Steady now," he'd said, voice warm as the firelight. "Every stitch tells a story." She'd been 6, her world small and safe, the scent of her mother's bread filling their home, but the fever had come like a thief, stealing her parents, her brother, leaving only echoes in a house to quiet. The debt collectors followed, their voices cold as the auction block. She'd sewn until her fingers bled, trying to keep the farm, but it wasn't enough. Bitter Creek had swallowed her story, spat it out for pennies. The horse slowed, and Clara blinked, the memory dissolving into the dusk. They'd reached a narrow valley, where a creek glinted like a silver thread through the scrub. A house stood against the rise of a hill, its wood weathered gray, a single chimney trailing smoke. It wasn't grand, but it was sturdy, its windows glowing faintly against the gathering dark. Elias dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel, and offered his hand again. She hesitated, her legs trembling as she slid from the saddle. The ground felt unsteady, like it might give way beneath her. "Supper's waiting," he said, nodding toward the house. His voice was gruff, but there was a softness in it, like a stone smoothed by a river. She followed him, her steps slow, the weight of her past dragging at her heels. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and bread, and a table held a simple spread: cornbread, beans, a pitcher of water. A woman stood by the stove, her hair gray and braided, her eyes sharp but kind. "This is Mary," Elias said. "My sister. She keeps the place from falling apart." Mary's gaze flicked over Clara, taking in the torn dress, the dirt-streaked face. "Sit," she said, not unkindly, pushing a plate toward her. Clara's hands shook as she took a piece of cornbread, its warmth seeping into her palms. She ate slowly, each bite a small rebellion against the emptiness inside her. The room was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the clink of a spoon against a bowl. Elias sat across from her, his hands folded, watching the steam rise from his plate. Mary moved about, her presence a steady hum like the land itself. Clara's eyes wandered to a photograph on the wall, faded and curling at the edges. A young woman, her smile soft, stood beside a man who looked like a younger Elias, his arm around her. The image stirred something in Clara, a pang she couldn't name. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias's jaw tightened, his gaze dropping to his hands. "My wife," he said. The words clipped. "Gone 5 years now." Mary's spoon paused, and the room seemed to hold its breath again. Clara regretted the question, but the silence was worse. Pressing against her like a weight, she pushed her plate away, the food settling heavy in her stomach. "Why'd you bring me here?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant. Elias looked at her then, his eyes steady, unyielding. "Because I've seen what happens to folks left behind," he said, "and I ain't one to walk away." His words hung in the air, simple but heavy, like stones in a riverbed. Clara's throat tightened, and she looked down, her fingers tracing the grain of the table. The firelight danced across her knuckles, and for the first time in days, she felt a faint stir of something like safety, though she didn't trust it yet. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, carrying the scent of rain. Clara's hands stilled, and she thought of the auction block, the laughter, the dust that had clung to her like shame. It was still there, but fainter now, softened by the warmth of the room. The weight of Elias's words. The morning broke, cold, the air sharp with frost. Clara woke to the scent of coffee and the faint clatter of pans. Her body ached, stiff from the narrow bed in the small room Mary had given her. The blanket, patched but warm, smelled of cedar and thyme. She lay still, staring at the ceiling's cracked beams, the weight of yesterday pressing against her chest. The laughter of Bitter Creek still echoed, but fainter now, drowned by the quiet of this place. She rose, her bare feet cold on the wooden floor, and pulled her shawl tight. The window showed a world dusted with frost, the creek glinting like a blade under the dawn. Downstairs, Mary kneaded dough, her hands steady, flour dusting her knuckles. Elias was gone, his chair empty, his coat missing from the hook by the door. "He's out with the herd," Mary said without looking up. "Always is. This time of day." Clara nodded, her fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. The kitchen felt too warm, too alive, after the endless dust of the road. She sat, and Mary slid a mug of coffee toward her, black and bitter. It burned her tongue, but she drank anyway, needing the heat. The days began to blur. Clara helped where she could, chopping wood, mending fences, scrubbing pots until her hands reddened. The work was hard, but it anchored her, each task a small defiance against the emptiness she'd carried. Mary taught her to milk the cow, her voice sharp but patient, and Clara's hands, once nimble with a needle, learned the rhythm of it. Elias was often gone, tending the cattle or riding to town, but when he was there, his presence was quiet, steady, like the hills beyond the house. He spoke little, but his eyes lingered on her sometimes, not with want, but with a question she couldn't answer. One evening, as the sky burned orange, Clara found him by the barn, sharpening a knife. The blade caught the light, flashing like a warning. She hesitated, then stepped closer, the grass crunching under her boots. "You don't owe me nothin'," she said, her voice low, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Why, keep me here?" He paused, the whetstone still in his hand, and looked at her. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were clear, like a sky after rain. "Ain't about owing," he said. "It's about what's right." She wanted to argue, to push against his words, but they settled in her, heavy and true. She thought of her brother, his small body burning with fever, his hand clutching hers until it went still. She'd buried him herself, the dirt caking under her nails, the shovel's weight a punishment she deserved. Elias's voice pulled her back. "You ever think about what you're running from?" he asked, his tone soft but piercing. She wouldn't answer, her throat tight, but her hands trembled, and she turned away, the knife's glint still burning in her mind. That night, she dreamed of the auction block, the crowd's laughter sharp as broken glass. She woke gasping, her chest heaving, the room dark and close. The floor creaked as she stood, and she moved to the window, pressing her palms against the cold glass. The stars were sharp, endless, and she felt small beneath them, a speck in a world that didn't care. But then she heard the faint lowing of cattle, the creak of the barn door, and she knew Elias was out there, working in the dark. The thought steadied her, though she didn't know why. The next morning, Mary handed her a basket of mending shirts, socks, a torn jacket. Clara's fingers found the needle easily, the old rhythm returning like a forgotten song. As she stitched, she felt the weight of her past shift, not gone but lighter, like a stone worn smooth by water. Mary watched her, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You've got a gift," she said, and Clara's cheeks warmed, the praise unfamiliar, sharp. As joy. Outside, the frost had melted, leaving the earth soft and dark. Clara stepped onto the porch, the basket still in her arms, and saw Elias riding in, his hat low, his coat dusted with dirt. He nodded at her, a small gesture, but it carried the weight of recognition. She stood there, the needle still in her hand, the air cool against her skin. The world felt different now, not kind, but possible, and she wasn't sure if that scared her more than the dust ever had. The days grew shorter, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Clara's hands found a rhythm in the work, mending, milking, stacking wood until her shoulders ached. The ranch was a living thing, demanding and unyielding. But it gave back in small ways, the warmth of the cow's flank, the creak of the porch under her boots, the way the creek caught the morning light. She moved through the tasks like a ghost, finding flesh, her body remembering what her heart still resisted. Mary's sharp eyes softened over time, and Clara caught her humming once, a low tune that felt like a memory of home. Elias was a constant shadow, there but not pressing, his silence a language she was learning to read. She saw it in the way he handled the horses, gentle despite his rough hands, or how he paused at the photograph on the wall, his fingers brushing the frame before he turned away. Clara wondered about the woman in the picture, her smile frozen in time, and what it meant to carry a ghost like that. She didn't ask. Her own ghosts were heavy enough, her mother's voice, her brother's fevered grip, the auctioneer's gavel like a hammer on her heart. One afternoon, as snow dusted the valley, Clara found a torn shirt in the mending basket, its fabric worn thin but soft, like it had been loved. She stitched it carefully, her needle moving with the precision of years spent sewing for survival. When she handed it to Elias, his fingers lingered on the fabric, his eyes meeting hers. "You didn't have to," he said, voice low. She shrugged, looking away, the weight of his gaze too much. "Felt right," she muttered, and he nodded, as if that was enough. That night, a storm rolled in, the wind howling like a living thing. Clara sat by the fire, her hands idle for once, the crackle of the flames filling the silence. Mary was knitting, her needles clicking, and Elias sat carving a piece of wood, the shavings curling at his feet. The room felt small, warm, a bull against the cold outside. Clara's chest tightened, not with fear, but with something sharper, hope, maybe, or the fear of it. She'd spent so long running, guarding herself against the world's indifference, that this warmth felt like a betrayal. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor, and stepped outside. The wind bit at her face, snow swirling in the dark. She walked to the creek, its edges frozen, the water still moving beneath like a pulse. Her breath clouded the air, and she thought of Bitter Creek, the laughter, the hands that had pushed her away. She'd be nothing to them, a thing to be sold. But here, in this valley, she was something else. Not whole, not yet, but seen. The realization stung, and she pressed her hands to her face, the cold grounding her. Footsteps crunched behind her. Elias stood there, his coat dusted with snow, his hat pulled low. "You'll freeze," he said, but there was no judgment in it. She didn't move, her eyes fixed on the creek. "Why do you stay?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "This place, this life, it's hard. Empty." He was quiet for a long moment, his breath visible in the cold. "Ain't empty," he said finally. "It's just waitin' for spring, for rain, for something to grow." His words settled in her, heavy as truth, and she felt the weight of her own waiting to break, to heal, to trust. He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that she felt his warmth. "You don't gotta decide now," he said, "but you're welcome here, long as you want." She nodded, her throat tight, and turned back to the house, its windows glowing like beacons. The snow fell softer now, blanketing the earth, and she thought of her mother's hands, folding hers around a needle, teaching her to stitch a story. Maybe this was a new one, fragile but forming, thread by thread. The snow deepened, blanketing the valley in silence. Clara's days settled into a quiet rhythm, each one a stitch in a pattern she hadn't chosen but couldn't deny. The ranch demanded her hands hauling water, mending harnesses, tending the fire, and she gave them willingly, her body finding purpose where her heart still hesitated. The cold was relentless, seeping through the cracks in the walls, but the house held fast. its warmth a defiance against the winter. Mary's sharp tongue softened her stories of the land and its seasons spilling out over coffee. And Clara listened, her silence a kind of surrender. Elias was a constant, his presence steady as the hills. She saw him in the small things, the way he brushed snow from the horses' manes, his breath clouding in the dawn, the way he carved wooden figures, birds mostly, their wings delicate under his rough hands. Once, he left one on the table, a sparrow, its beak tilted upward. Clara held it, her thumb tracing its edges, and felt something shift inside her, like a door creaking open. She didn't thank him. Words felt too fragile for what it meant. One morning, as the sky hung heavy with clouds, Mary sent her to the barn with a bucket of oats. The air was sharp, the ground slick with ice. Inside, Elias was mending a store, his shirt damp with sweat despite the cold. He looked up, his eyes catching hers, and for a moment, the world was just the creak of the barn, the scent of hay, the weight of his gaze. "You're stayin'," he said, not a question but a statement, soft as the snow outside. Clara's breath caught, her fingers tightening on the bucket. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to stay." He set the hammer down, his hands still, and stepped closer. "You're already doing it," he said, "one day at a time." His words were simple, but they cut through her, sharp as the wind. She thought of the auction block, the laughter, the way her name had been stripped away. She thought of her brother, his small hand in hers, and the grave she dug alone. Staying meant risking it all again, trust, hope, a life that could break her, but running meant losing something she was only beginning to name. She turned away, the bucket heavy in her hands, and stepped into the snow. The valley stretched before her, white and endless, the creek a dark ribbon beneath the ice. She could leave, walk, until the cold took her, until the buzzards found her again. Or she could stay, stitch by stitch, and see what grew. Her chest ached, not with grief, but with the weight of choice. She heard Elias's steps behind her, steady, not pressing, and she knew he wouldn't stop her if she walked away. That was what scared her most, his faith in her unearned, unwavering. She stood there, the snow dusting her shawl, and thought of her mother's voice, soft as thread. Every stitch tells a story. Clara's story had been one of loss, of dust and laughter that cut like knives. But maybe it could be more. She turned back to the house, its chimney smoke curling into the sky, a faint promise against the cold. Elias was there, watching, his hands in his pockets, his face unreadable, but open. She took a step toward him, then another, the snow crunching under her boots. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was enough. The sky cleared that night, the stars sharp as needles. Clara sat by the fire, the sparrow carving in her hands, its wings catching the light. Mary was asleep, her knitting abandoned, and Elias sat across from her, whittling another figure, the shavings falling like snow. The room was quiet, the storm gone, and Clara felt the dust of Bitter Creek settle. Not gone, but part of her, woven into the stitches of this new place. She looked at the sparrow, then at Elias, and let the silence hold her, soft as dawn. ***.